Excelencias, distinguidos colegas, señoras y señores, declaro abierta la sexta reunión de la 50ª sesión del Consejo de Derechos Humanos. Comenzamos ahora el evento conmemorativo de alto nivel con motivo de la 50ª sesión del Consejo de Derechos Humanos. Tengo el honor de dar la bienvenida al presidente del 76º periodo de sesiones de la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas, quien ofrecerá un discurso principal, Su Excelencia el señor Abdullah Yahid. Bienvenido. También me complace dar la bienvenida al señor Antonio Guterres, secretario general de las Naciones Unidas, a la señora Michelle Bachelet, alta comisionada de las Naciones Unidas para los Derechos Humanos, y a la señora Estela Carlotto, presidenta de la Asociación de Abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, que pronunciarán discursos de apertura. Permítame asimismo dar la bienvenida al señor Eric Tistounet, jefe de la subdivisión del Consejo de Derechos Humanos de la Oficina de la Alta Comisionada de las Naciones Unidas para los Derechos Humanos, que moderará la mesa redonda integrada por eminentes personalidades a quien también saludo. El señor Jan Eliasson, presidente de la 60ª sesión de la Asamblea General, durante la cual fue creado el Consejo de Derechos Humanos y ex vicesecretario general de las Naciones Unidas. Su Excelencia el señor Ivan Simonovic, representante permanente de Croacia ante las Naciones Unidas en Nueva York y ex subsecretario general de Derechos Humanos. Su Excelencia señora Supatra Srimaitripitak, representante permanente de Tailandia ante las Naciones Unidas en Ginebra. Excelentísima señora Yvette Stevens, presidenta de los seminarios interseccionales en 2019 sobre la contribución del Consejo de Derechos Humanos a la prevención de las violaciones de derechos humanos, con el mandato en virtud de la resolución 38/18 del Consejo de Derechos Humanos. Señor Víctor Madrigal Borbós, experto independiente sobre la protección contra la violencia y la discriminación basada en la orientación sexual y la identidad de género, y expresidente del Comité de Coordinación de los Procedimientos Especiales. Y la señora Monam Bikay, directora ejecutiva de la organización UPR Info. Antes de continuar, permítanme recordarles que los estados que deseen participar en el debate serán invitados a inscribirse más adelante levantando sus placas. Las instituciones nacionales de derechos humanos y las organizaciones no gubernamentales están invitadas a inscribirse en la mesa de la lista de oradores de las ONG en la sala. Excelencias, señoras y señores, no hay un evento conmemorativo sin un video conmemorativo. Así que deseo agradecer a todos nuestros colegas del equipo de prensa del Consejo la preparación del video conmemorativo de la 50ª sesión que veremos a continuación.
You will agree to double the budget of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and strengthen her office. You will also agree that the failures of the Human Rights Commission must be remedied by establishing a new Human Rights Council, the details of which must now be worked out during the 60th General Assembly.
The result of the vote is as follows: in favor 170, opposed 4, abstention 3.
Señoras y señores, tengo ahora el honor de dar la palabra a nuestro orador principal, el excelentísimo señor Abdullah Shahid, presidente del 76º periodo de sesiones de la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas, y le agradecemos mucho su presencia en persona en esta histórica sesión. Excelencia, tiene la palabra.
Special Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the President of the Human Rights Council for inviting me to address this important commemorative event on the occasion of the Council's 50th session. Let me also commend the tireless efforts of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and her office in providing support to the work of the Human Rights Council and its mechanisms. Both President Villegas and Madam Michelle Bachelet are our staunch champions for human rights diplomacy, which is at the core of the United Nations. Without full respect for human rights, we cannot maintain the international peace and security and achieve sustainable development. All three pillars are inextricably linked. In the context of the unprecedented challenges that the world faces, from climate change and COVID-19 to the conflict in Ukraine, focusing today's event on the achievements made and the lessons learned after 50 sessions of the Council proves to be timely and meaningful. The role of the Council and its mechanisms in promoting and protecting human rights have been crucial to combating and preventing human rights violations all around the world. In particular, the Universal Periodic Review has proven essential to advancing human rights across the globe. It has allowed for continuous review of human rights records of all UN member states on an equal basis. Besides promoting dialogue and cooperation between states on human rights issues, the UPR has led to critical legal reforms at national level, increased ratification of core international human rights instruments, and strengthened the implementation of action plans and strategies. The UPR has also opened spaces at the national level for collaboration between governments and CSOs. The special procedures, yet another contribution of the Council, play a vital role in advancing international human rights standards, raising awareness about human rights violations, and providing advice for technical cooperation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, since its inception, the Human Rights Council has proven to be efficient in responding to human rights crises, including by holding special sessions and urgent debates to respond to human rights emergencies. It has also shown its value to support the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and to combat climate change. In fact, when it comes to the SDGs, on average, 45% of all resolutions adopted since 2015 specifically refer to them. And I am encouraged by the adoption of 2 resolutions on human rights and climate change last year. These resolutions identify and reaffirm the threat posed by climate change to the enjoyment of human rights. For some countries, such as my own, small island states, this corresponds to the right to life. Ladies and gentlemen, I commend the work of the Trust Fund on achievements in enhancing participation of SIDS, LDCs and LLDCs, not only in the work of the Council, but also in broadening its membership. Throughout my presidency, one of my priorities has been to support countries in special situations. Indeed, in January, I launched the Fellowship of Hope with this priority in my mind. The fellowship provides 8 representatives from underrepresented countries the opportunity to work and learn at the UN General Assembly. It is my hope that these fellows leave my office as champions and ambassadors for multilateralism, including as it pertains to human rights. Excellencies, dear friends, the United Nations is and should be ever-changing and evolving. I commend efforts by the Human Rights Council to grow and adapt. I've been pleased that during my presidency, I've been able to support initiatives on UN revitalization. On our common agenda, the Secretary General's vision on the future of the United Nations, which has a strong human rights component, Member States, the United Nations system, and all relevant partners are on the path to advance its implementation after long discussions and 5 thematic consultations. Excellencies, there is no doubt that the Council is the main platform that promotes universal respect for the protection of human rights. Building on the innovations and progress of the Human Rights Council, let me provide 3 key takeaways today. First, we must recognize, respect, and implement the recommendations of the human rights mechanisms, as we have set them up to help us to advance our efforts to achieve a better world. Second, we must scale up efforts to address the root causes of human rights abuses and ensure that this is done with a whole-of-society approach, drawing upon the collective strength of the entire multilateral system. And finally, we must continue to build synergy between Geneva and New York through greater collaborative action and political will. Only together can we combat the challenges that we face. After all is said and done, the core task of the Council as part of the greater United Nations is to promote the fundamental principles of human dignity. We can do no less, and I wish you every success for today's deliberations. I thank you.
Muchas gracias. A continuación escucharemos un mensaje de video del señor Antonio Guterres, secretario general de las Naciones Unidas.
Distinguished President of the Human Rights Council, Madam High Commissioner, Excellencies. It is my privilege to send greetings to the Human Rights Council as you convene for your 50th session. The Human Rights Council is the fulcrum for international dialogue and cooperation to advance all human rights. Your Universal Periodic Review has presented for the first time a picture of the global state of human rights. Your special procedures have substantially deepened our understanding of and engagement on the full spectrum of human rights concerns, spanning civil, cultural, economic, political, and social rights. Your special sessions have sounded the alarm to force global attention on deteriorating situations demanding urgent responses. And your commissions of inquiries and fact-finding missions have contributed to keeping the imperative of accountability alive and ensuring that even the most protracted crises remain in focus. Your resolutions in Geneva have often catalyzed debates in the Security Council and General Assembly in New York, strengthening the links between peace and security, development, and human rights. Finally, the Human Rights Council has amplified the voices of civil society, the backbone of human rights work. Excellencies, our world is in peril from widespread conflict, including the war in Ukraine in all its dimensions, to deepening divisions, eroding trust, escalating inequalities, surging humanitarian needs, and the ever-worsening climate crisis. Today, more than ever, we need a stronger multilateral system anchored in human rights in all its diversity and universality. That is a driving force for our common agenda, and this Council will play a critical role in making it a reality. From protecting civic space and promoting good governance, advancing gender equality, and addressing racial and other forms of discrimination, to tackling climate change, rescuing the Sustainable Development Goals, and providing early warnings and preventing conflicts. I count on you to act with ambition, and you can count on me to fully support your work. I also want to acknowledge the tireless work of the Council Secretariat and call on Member States to ensure that they, along with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, have the resources and support they need to deliver on the ever-expanding demands placed on them. Together we can, and we will, further strengthen our links and synergies between Geneva and New York, and ensure that human rights are recognized as central to resolving our most pressing challenges, as outlined in my call to action for human rights. In closing, I want to express my profound gratitude to Michelle Bachelet for her life of selfless service in defense of human rights for everyone, everywhere. In an extremely challenging political context, she stood up and spoke out to give voice to the voiceless. Thank you for your dedication and determination, your counsel and wisdom, and for always making sure that human rights remain where they belong, at the very center of our work. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señor secretario general. Tiene la palabra la señora Michelle Bachelet, alta comisionada de las Naciones Unidas para los Derechos Humanos. Tiene la palabra.
Gracias. Distinguished President of the 76th session of the General Assembly, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, Distinguished President of the Human Rights Council, Ambassador Federico Villegas, Excellencies, dear Estela Carlotto, dear panelists, colleagues and friends. I'm honored to be here today to mark the 50th regular session of the Human Rights Council. As we speak, the world continues to be thrust ever deeper into crisis, and intensifying conflict, profound inequalities and climate change as overhanging threat to our very existence. More than ever, the work of this Council is pivotal. It is urgent. It is a privilege to support it and to be part of it. In just 16 years, the Council has grown into a forum that addresses virtually every human rights issue through open, honest, and transparent dialogue. Its activities have increased exponentially. The Council has held 49 regular sessions, 34 special sessions, and 7 urgent debates. It has adopted 1,372 resolutions. The importance of the Council within the United Nations architecture is markedly clear. Each session, the Council hears from a growing diversity of voices, a trend we must continue. Increased participation by small island developing states and developing countries, for example, including in the roles of President or Vice President, is representative of the meaningful multilateralism that this Council stands for. Excellencies, the COVID-19 pandemic has posed challenges many of us have never seen in our lifetimes. The Council has stood up to the test, keeping human rights on the world's agenda and maintaining its ability to respond to urgent issues. In the last more than 2 years, members maintain agility and responsiveness to enhance virtual and hybrid modes, which work during the pandemic demanded. Today, panel discussions benefit from remote participation of experts from all over the world, allowing for even stronger and more informed conversations on some of the most crucial issues of our time. I also want to make specific mention of the special procedures, which I consider to be a central cog in the UN's human rights machinery. In the past 10 years, the Council has created 10 new special procedure mandates, and I'm pleased to see the number of states extending invitations to them has increased at the same time. I'm also happy to know that gender balance has been achieved among mandate holders. Currently, half are women. As we mark the 50th session of the Council, the Universal Periodic Review also deserves mention. All 193 member states have voluntarily participated in its 3 cycles, making it the best possible entry point into the consideration of human rights worldwide. All countries, whether small or large, or economically strong or weak, receive the same level of attention and scrutiny. The UPR is a powerful and irreplaceable mechanism, and I hope it will only continue to grow in importance. Excellencies, far too often, commentators will debate whether the Council should focus its attention on specific world regions or on civil and political rather than economical, social and cultural rights, or vice versa. I welcome and myself stand by the position of a growing number that these are sterile discussions, because by their very nature, human rights are universal. No human rights violation should be left aside, and all situations considered by the human rights mechanisms of the Council should warrant attention by the international community. Today, let us aim to ensure we remain relevant in our ever-changing world. Let us continue to treat all matters with equal importance, whether it is gender equality, the impact of new technologies on human rights, the fight against corruption, the right to food or health care, or the issues faced unaccompanied migrant children. Our responsibility to take time to consider these issues with urgency and with effectiveness. My office, particularly the Council Secretariat, will continue to provide dedicated support to the Council and its subsidiary bodies. However, there is a limit to what can be absorbed. The commitment made by almost all states in placing human rights at the forefront of the UN activities need to also be matched with funding and resources. Today, as we celebrate all of the achievements that the Council has made, we call on you for your support. The Human Rights Council has played an integral role in responding to and preventing further human rights violations around the world. Let us continue its powerful legacy. I thank you.
Muchas gracias, Alta Comisionada. A continuación, escucharemos una declaración en video de la señora Estela Carlotto, presidenta de la Asociación de Abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, y permítanme una pequeña digresión. Estela Carlotto es un símbolo de la lucha por los derechos humanos en la Argentina y en muchas partes del mundo. Solía venir a la antigua Comisión de Derechos Humanos junto con otras abuelas para denunciar las atrocidades de la dictadura militar que gobernaba mi país. En ese entonces la delegación argentina buscaba por todos los medios posibles impedir su participación. Hoy tiene 91 años y es invitada de honor a este evento. Su presencia representa no solo la evolución de una sociedad, sino también de un sistema que reconoce en la sociedad civil y en los defensores de derechos humanos un socio indispensable en la promoción y protección de los derechos humanos. Estela.
Las abuelas de Plaza de Mayo celebramos que el Consejo de Derechos Humanos de Naciones Unidas esté realizando su sesión número 50. Para nosotras es muy importante porque el sistema universal nos dio acogida para dar visibilidad a lo que estaba ocurriendo en nuestro país. Que una dictadura feroz estaba avasallando los derechos humanos de gran parte de la población. El sistema universal de protección de los derechos humanos fue muy importante para víctimas y familiares, y lo seguirá siendo. A mí personalmente, junto a otras abuelas, periódicamente, hemos ido al Consejo a denunciar ante la comunidad internacional lo que estaba pasando en mi país. Recuerdo a varias personas que ayudaron a las abuelas y a las madres de Plaza de Mayo para que pudieran participar en las reuniones del Consejo cuando los representantes del gobierno dictatorial no les permitían hablar hasta desde la banca de Argentina. Esas organizaciones de la sociedad civil que las ayudaron, de esas voy a nombrar algunas: Amnistía Internacional, Cruz Roja Internacional y bueno, también otras que estarán en la memoria de nuestra búsqueda de los nietos. Logramos, junto a víctimas y familiares de Argentina y de otros países de Latinoamérica, que en 1980, cuando todavía sufríamos dictaduras, la entonces Comisión de Derechos Humanos creara el grupo de trabajo sobre desapariciones forzadas e involuntarias. Luego, ya recuperada la democracia en mi país, volvimos a Naciones Unidas para trabajar en la redacción de la Convención por los Derechos del Niño, para seguramente y asegurarnos que el derecho a la identidad iba a estar amparada por esa convención tan importante. También volvimos, junto a las madres de Plaza de Mayo y familiares, a trabajar en la Convención sobre Desaparición Forzada, en su redacción y en su firma, que finalmente se firmó en el año 2006. Hoy continuamos trabajando para que esta convención sea ratificada por la mayor cantidad de países. De hecho, expertos argentinos, amigos de las abuelas, hoy forman y son parte del grupo de trabajo del Comité contra Desapariciones Forzadas. El proceso de memoria, verdad y justicia de Argentina, que nos permitió como sociedad enfrentar a esta trágica historia, juzgando a los genocidas, buscando todo al Estado junto a nosotros, a estos bebés y niños robados, para reparar de alguna manera estos hechos terribles para nuestra historia y decir nunca más a un Estado terrorista. Hoy, la presidenta del Consejo de Derechos Humanos está ejercido por un compatriota nuestro. Es un orgullo y una reparación para el movimiento de derechos humanos de mi país. Ojalá que este Consejo, los Estados miembros, puedan trabajar mancomunadamente para que toda la humanidad pueda vivir en paz y que el pleno ejercicio de los derechos económicos, sociales y culturales, así como los derechos civiles y políticos, sea una realidad y no una mera enunciación. Mis saludos y los mejores deseos para que este encuentro sea positivo. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Estela. Sabemos el enorme esfuerzo que hiciste para poder enviarnos este mensaje. Y antes de continuar, me ha solicitado la palabra la delegación de Alemania y vicepresidenta de este Consejo. Embajadora, tiene la palabra.
President, dear High Commissioner, today's commemorative event not only provides us with a moment of reflection on the past 49 sessions of the Human Rights Council, but also an opportunity to warmly thank you, Madam High Commissioner, on behalf of more than 100 countries, and may I add that we only started this 24 hours ago, for your tireless work throughout the past years. 4 years ago, you said you were ready for the challenge to protect and promote the human rights of everyone, everywhere. You also said it is one of the most important jobs at the international level, and you could have added that it is one of the most challenging as well. Current crises, inter alia climate change, the pandemic, or armed conflicts have highlighted that a strong voice and advocate for human rights is indispensable. We would like to thank you for being this voice who has tirelessly advocated for universal responses anchored in human rights. Thank you. And may I add, in my personal capacity, and I have heard this several and many times, you have been an inspiration for many of us, and certainly for many women and girls.
Muchas gracias, embajadora. Y hacemos una pequeña pausa a fin de despedir al presidente de la Asamblea General y a la señora alta comisionada, a quienes vuelvo a agradecer a ambos por su presencia y su participación. Muy bien. Invito ahora al señor Erik Tistunet, jefe de la subdivisión del Consejo de Derechos Humanos de la Oficina del Alto Comisionado de las Naciones Unidas para los Derechos Humanos, a moderar la mesa redonda. Erik, tienes la palabra.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président et Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, chers panélistes. C'est un très grand honneur pour moi d'être ici parmi vous et de modérer ce panel qui, j'espère, sera de très grande utilité et importance. Monsieur le Président, lorsque vous m'aviez évoqué la possibilité d'organiser cette séance particulière, je me suis replongé dans certains documents de l'époque, notamment les déclarations prononcées il y a 50 séances dans une salle équivalente lorsque le Conseil s'est ouvert, on a vu des images tout à l'heure, ainsi que les propos qui ont été tenus par différents intervenants et qui ont été compilés dans un livre publié par la Confédération suisse qui s'appelle « Les 365 premières journées du Conseil des droits de l'homme ». Et j'ai examiné et j'ai lu ces déclarations et j'ai tiré de cela peut-être 4 enseignements qui peut-être pourront fournir la base de la discussion que nous aurons tout à l'heure avec nos panélistes et avec la salle. La première, c'était l'importance qu'attachaient toutes et tous qui étaient liés à la création de ce Conseil et au paquet institutionnel à la centralité de l'individu dans les travaux du Conseil. Le fait que l'individu était perçu par les uns et par les autres comme devant être le centre de l'attachement du Conseil et sa cible principale, essayer de les protéger au mieux qu'il serait possible de le faire. Et le président de l'Assemblée générale de l'époque, que nous entendrons tout à l'heure, M. Jan Eliasson, avait mentionné à ce titre la référence à la première phase de la Déclaration universelle, nous les peuples des Nations unies. Et le secrétaire général, lui, avait conclu sa déclaration, et je ne peux pas m'empêcher de la lire en disant, c'est ma traduction, « Songez à toutes celles et ceux dont les droits sont niés, qu'il s'agisse de droits civils ou politiques, de droits économiques, sociaux et culturels, qu'il s'agisse de personnes ayant succombé sous les traitements brutaux de dirigeants arbitraires ou de l'ignorance, de la faim et de la maladie. » C'est quelque chose que l'on retrouve comme un leitmotiv pendant ces 2 années de travail du Conseil et précédemment de l'Assemblée générale. Donc la place de l'individu au cœur avec son corollaire qui est comment est-ce que le Conseil pourrait faire une différence, comment pourrait-il avoir un impact dans la vie des gens. Et c'était à l'aune de ceci que les orateurs qui se sont succédés avaient essayé de gauger qu'est-ce que 10 ans plus tard serait le Conseil. Peut-être aujourd'hui pour nous jeter un coup d'œil sur cette question. Autre question fondamentale qui était également très largement citée, c'est la notion de dialogue, en référence ou peut-être en complément de ce que la Commission des droits de l'homme avait été. Et à cela était attachée cette notion de la culture, de la discussion, du dialogue et ce désir de surmonter les confrontations et ce que l'on appelait à l'époque la politisation et que pour ma part j'appellerais plutôt la polarisation et essayer de transcender cette polarisation pour instaurer un dialogue entre les différents protagonistes. Ceci avait été mentionné notamment au regard de l'examen périodique universel qui à l'époque, je vous rappelle, était un système qui allait être mis en place et qui n'avait pas été expérimenté. Et c'était mentionné aussi par le facilitateur de l'époque, les facilitateurs de l'époque et les premiers présidents du Conseil. Troisième point qui revenait très fortement de ces déclarations que j'ai lues, c'était la notion de mise en œuvre effective et efficace tant des résolutions du Conseil que des travaux des organes subsidiaires et en premier lieu, ce qui a été mentionné tout à l'heure par le président de l'Assemblée générale, par le secrétaire général, le haut-commissaire, les rapporteurs spéciaux, les commissions d'enquête et évidemment l'examen périodique universel. Et ceci était lié avec la notion de la gestion que ce Conseil ferait des crises, qu'il s'agisse de crises dans des pays ou de crises s'agissant de thématiques particulières. Et c'est quelque chose qui a été mentionné à plusieurs reprises, notamment par les facilitateurs de la première année de la mise en place du paquet institutionnel. Et quatrième point, la question de l'universalité des droits. question de l'universalité des droits et des libertés, avec cette volonté de surmonter cette dichotomie annoncée, théorique, mais absolument pas justifiée en pratique, entre les droits civils et politiques d'un côté, les droits économiques, sociaux et culturels de l'autre, et de surmonter cela en ayant aussi une vision aussi large que possible des États et des situations qui devaient être abordées. Donc l'ensemble du spectre des questions touchant aux droits de l'homme, ou des droits humains, avec une attention tout à fait particulière qui était insistée à l'époque sur celles et ceux des délégations qui ne bénéficiaient pas d'un soutien massif et important. Donc cette notion et cette thématique étaient très importantes, avec des références, par exemple, par la haut-commissaire aux droits de l'homme de l'époque, ou par les facilitateurs, par le secrétaire général, etc. Je vais maintenant tourner vers l'anglais et m'adresser à chacun des panélistes en commençant par Monsieur Ivan Simonovic, qui était l'ancien sous-secrétaire général aux droits de l'homme à New York, mais est à présent représentant permanent de la Croatie aux Nations Unies. Mr. Simonovic, the Council is meeting in this beautiful room 20. You are in New York, I guess. But given the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Council is taking full advantage of the state-of-the-art remote participation platforms. That's what was mentioned earlier on. The Council debates are consuming hundreds of meetings per year, and the resolutions it adopts are numerous. However, it is often considered that the only way to gauge the effectiveness of a human rights body, whichever it is whether its work is actually making a difference. Mr. Simonovic, based on your experience as former Assistant Secretary General representing the Human Rights Office in New York and currently permanent representative of your own country to the UN in New York, would you mind sharing with this room here in Geneva your viewpoints and experience as to the impact of the Council work in the field? Do you actually consider that the work of this Council is making a difference there? And if so, please do not hesitate. I would encourage you to do so, to share concrete and positive experiences. So if Mr. Ivan Simonovic could be put online, please. Maybe I was too fast in saying that the Council did great and the Secretariat too in remote participation. Maybe we could give it another try. I think Mr. Simonovic is online, but he doesn't appear on the screen. Ivan, sorry about this. Please, you have the floor.
No, I will just continue. I wanted to thank Mr. President for organizing this panel and creating us this wonderful opportunity to discuss. I gladly accepted to address the issue of influence of the Human Rights Council in the field because it addresses what, in my view, matters most. When I was the president of ECOSOC some 20 years ago, when I was working for the UN as ASG for human rights and responsibility to protect, and then when I was working as PR at the UN in New York, and it's my second term now, I always thought about the same standard for measuring the UN success. It should not be measured by the number of resolutions that we passed, but by the difference that we make in real life. So what's the difference that Human Rights Council makes in real life? What is the influence of Human Rights Council in the field? My answer to this crucial question is facilitated by participation of excellent panelists, and I would take the liberty when referring to them to call them by their first name. Some of Human Rights Council influence in the field goes directly and some indirectly. For example, when Human Rights Council established the UN independent investigation in Burundi, it directly contributed to prevention of grave human rights violations in the country, as well as potential atrocity crimes. Numerous monitoring, investigating, and reporting mechanisms provide for similar contributions. The same applies to special rapporteurs and their reporting. And I'm glad that Victor will say something more about their contributions. Introducing special sessions, intersessional meetings, and informal dialogues with High Commissioner is very helpful as well. When OHCHR field presences or human rights components of peacekeeping and operations and special political missions warn that the situation in some countries' situations is rapidly deteriorating, it is important that the Human Rights Council can be quickly informed and for Human Rights Council to take appropriate action, working in close coordination with other UN organs, especially the Security Council. It is excellent that Yvette can continue discussing this issue. But Human Rights Council's influence in the field is not only restricted to operational prevention addressing imminent human rights threats. Structural prevention contributing to make countries more resilient to potential human rights violations is an area where in future I think we should invest even more. It is a part of the comprehensive prevention agenda that the Secretary General consistently advocates. In this regard, I'm happy that next panelists will also address related issues. Supatra will discuss the importance of technical cooperation, building human rights capacities, make countries more resilient to all human rights challenges. Human rights protection structures should be treated broadly. In addition to national human rights institutions, they include free media, independent civil society, as well as organized education and human rights training. One of the greatest achievements of the Human Rights Council is the Universal Periodic Review. If civil society, national human rights institutions, as well as special rapporteurs provide the right input, that can provide for an excellent human rights situation diagnostic in individual countries. UPR's role is not naming and shaming, but rather identifying human rights protection and promotion gaps and helping countries to improve the situation. I'm therefore very glad that Mona will be able to expand on that as well. Finally, Mr. Moderator, let me conclude. The Human Rights Council has an important influence in the field directly and indirectly. Its standard-setting role should be always accompanied with implementation efforts. OHCHR does a wonderful job in this respect. Dear former colleagues, I continue to be proud of your work. However, human rights in the field are one UN task. only if every head of the UN mission, every UN coordinator, as well as every UN staff member perceives human rights as the core UN value, as well as recognizes her and his duty to implement them in the field, we can successfully move forward. In this moving forward, the Human Rights Council and High Commissioner for Human Rights with her independent mandate are in the center. However, overall implementation of human rights in the field is the whole of UN's job, working together with governments and civil society. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Simonovic, pour vos propos. C'était un grand plaisir de travailler avec vous pendant toutes ces années. I understand that the link has been established now with Mr. Jan Eliasson, who was president of the 60th session of the GA when the Council resolution was adopted, and was, of course, former Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. As was mentioned by previous speakers, the Council working methods have profoundly evolved during the past 50 sessions. The magnitude of these changes has been underlined, and to an extent it might be very fair to state that the Council architecture today is significantly different to the one that existed at the very start of its existence. Mr. Eliasson, having presided over the very delicate negotiation that led to the adoption of Resolution 60/251, and having later worked with the Council as Deputy Secretary General, would you mind sharing your thoughts about this particular evolution? And in particular, my question would be about your insights on whether your assumptions and expectations at the start of the process have materialized, and that would be very much appreciated if you could shed light and provide us with some examples. Mr. Eliasson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, moderator. First of all, do you hear me?
Yes, we do. Very well. Thank you.
Good, good. I'm very glad to be invited. I was, as you know, President General Assembly 2005 and 6. The negotiations went on for almost half a year and ended up with the decision of the General Assembly on the 15th of March to adopt Resolution 60/251 with 170 votes, 3 abstentions and 4 vote against. First, I would say that they were difficult and arduous, and that we had sometimes even a dramatic and confrontational situation. First of all, the preceding Human Rights Commission had lost respect and legitimacy, which created a certain urgency to come to conclusions. Secondly, we had very high ambition for the new council, because it was based on the formula from September 2005 in the outcome document, where we stated that there is no peace without development, and no development without peace, and neither peace nor development without respect of human rights. So these 3 pillars are interdependent. They are either mutually reinforcing or they are mutually undermining and weakening. The third aspect of the talks were that they were infected by the present political atmosphere in a very serious area. Namely, you may recall the Danish cartoons of 2006, which caused actually deadly demonstrations in several parts of the Muslim world, and quite a bit of diplomatic turmoil in New York, and I guess also in Geneva. That led to a move in the last minute by certain Muslim countries, particularly Pakistan, to have an additional paragraph in the resolution text. And lastly, there were very maximalistic demands from not least the United States under Ambassador John Bolton, which meant, for instance, that they questioned the universality by only adopting members who were believers and could prove their records and in human rights. Anyway, it led to a vote, and it was established, and it was quite controversial from the point of view that a resolution of this nature usually is adopted by consensus. But I felt as president that I had to move along, because otherwise the United Nations would have lacked a legitimate branch of human rights, which is absolutely crucial. In view of that, those three pillars that I mentioned in the beginning. On the achievement, Mr. Moderator, I would say that you have done a great job. I think the 50 sessions that you have had have been very productive. I think, like Ivan, whom I listened to a while ago, is right in pointing to the UPR, the Universal Periodic Review, as a main pillar of the Human Rights Council architecture. By establishing the universality as a principle, I think we got a more relaxed atmosphere for the negotiations. That, plus the fact that I very often, as president and my also co-chairs, stress that human rights is not only political and civil, it's also economic, social, and cultural. That led to a certain reduction of that tension, those tensions that I mentioned in the beginning. The second thing that I like about the Council's development is that you have used the mechanisms in a very sharp way, an adequate way, fact-finding missions, commissions of inquiries, independent experts, and also developed the very important aspect of technical assistance and capacity building. And also the fact that you have been flexible on regular sessions, on special sessions, and of course that the Office of the High Commissioner has been very active through the years. I think you have had excellent commissioners during the years since I left the work as President of the General Assembly. And here I, of course, want to pay a special tribute to my friend Michelle Bachelet, who is evidently leaving now, a person who has personal experiences of violations of human rights, and a person who has played a champion role in standing up for human rights in the world. So thank you for all your work. Now, another thing that has been very good, as I understand, is that you have extended your contact with civil society, because I think this is extremely important that the Council stands for openness and accountability. It has to be respected and well regarded in all parts of the world. And I think the fact that you connect with the people in the spirit of the UN Charter, we the peoples, remember, and by that you reach out. And I think you should continue on that road, if I may give a piece of modest advice. For the challenges and problems that exist, and possibly even room for improvement, I think still we have the problem that I pointed to as President of the General Assembly at the time, namely the underfunding of the third pillar of the human rights pillar. We need to also to put resources behind this priority of human rights. I also think that we could do more on education and knowledge of human rights and international humanitarian law. I think it is striking, if you look at the media in the world and debates and political councils, that there isn't the depth and detailed knowledge that is necessary. So I think anything you can invest in further education on different levels on human rights and international humanitarian law could be extremely important, also to reach out to young people and the next generation who have to run with the baton in this race. I also think that you could do more with the human rights as a preventive tool. When I was Deputy Secretary General, I tried together with Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General, to launch a program called Human Rights Up Front, which, among other things, had an element of early warning, in its structure, that in fact human rights violations are often the first sign of a conflict, even a military conflict to come. And if we listen to those conflicts early on, if we listen to the vibrations in the ground, we can avoid disasters, both in human terms and in financial terms. So here is, I think, a room for further development and bringing up this program, which has been continued also with the initiative of the President of Secretary Guterres. But I think we should particularly point to the preventive value of identifying human rights violations as the start of a conflict to come. So, of course, I could add to the list that we have to look around the world right now and see a rather somber picture. We need protection of the human rights defenders. We need to watch out for the free press and journalist situations. We have to look at the freedom of association and assembly, which is threatened in several parts of the world. And I think also we need to remind ourselves that members should, in the spirit of the resolution of 2006, also lead by example in human rights. And then we also need to look for the future. We have the gender issues, of course, and children's rights and environment and climate change. And of course, the age of digital communications, where you have a number of human rights challenges. But altogether, I think we should remember what I always told my young colleagues at the UN when they were somewhat frustrated about developments, that United Nations is a reflection of two things. It is a reflection of the world as it is, and it is sometimes not a pretty place, and particularly today, I would say. But the United Nations is also a reflection of the world as it should be. And our job is to reduce the gap between the world as it is and the world as it should be. And there, I think the Human Rights Council has an extremely important role, in the spirit, again, of the UN Charter, of putting the human being in the center. And I think you, by these 50 sessions, have moved the needle forward in the right manner. And that if you continue and bring in that momentum and be reminded of the purposes behind not only the resolution, but also the UN Charter, then I think we will be very grateful for your efforts. And I'm glad and thankful that you invited me to this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aliasson, for your words and your thoughts. Monsieur le Président, si vous m'autorisez une anecdote, à chaque session, vous utilisez votre marteau un nombre incalculable de fois, et si on devait calculer depuis combien de coups de marteau ont été utilisés depuis le premier jour, on arriverait à plusieurs dizaines de milliers. Sachez que le premier coup de marteau l'a été par M. Eliasson lorsqu'il a ouvert la session du Conseil le 19 juin 2006. Donc c'est très important de l'avoir eu avec nous. Je voudrais me tourner maintenant vers Madame l'ambassadrice Supatra Simaitripitak, représentante permanente de la Thaïlande aux Nations Unies. The outside world, if I may use these terms, are often considering the work of the Council through the exclusive lenses of action on specific country resolution or the adoption of specific norms and standards in the field of human rights. But the Council is much more than that. And such is unfortunately the way we are living in with our network, which is becoming predominant, and it is proceeding in a way which we cannot, unfortunately, always monitor. Mrs. Simaitripitak, Thailand has always spent a great deal of time and energy encouraging this Council and its stakeholders to focus on technical cooperation, which a rapid glance in the terms of Resolution 60/251 clearly identifies as a cornerstone of the nascent Human Rights Council. 50 sessions later, would you mind sharing your views as to whether technical cooperation is indeed used to the fullest extent possible? And how would you see this program evolved in the forthcoming years? You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. At the outset, I wish to thank the President for allowing me to be part of this high-level commemorative event. I feel very honored. And my thanks goes to Kun Erik for the introduction and the question. I will speak about the past to recall facts and what happened first, and then I will try to point out what would help us pave the way for the future so that technical cooperation can be used at the fullest extent possible. The operative paragraph 5A of the UNGA Resolution 60/251 in 2006 put it clearly that, I quote, "The Council shall inter alia promote human rights, education and learning, as well as advisory services, technical assistance and capacity building to be provided in consultation with and with the consent of member states concerned." It is pertinent to note that almost 2 decades ago, our predecessors already recognized the relevance of technical cooperation to human rights work. There are 2 key messages in this paragraph 5A. 1, technical assistance is considered one of the priority missions of the Council. 2, it is necessary for the Council to consult and to get consent of the country in performing their missions, including in providing technical cooperation. During Thailand presidency of the Council 2010 to 2011, we saw that even though technical cooperation in the fields of human rights became more visible and gained more attention and support by a range of countries, especially developing countries and countries with human rights situation. Still, technical cooperation was not put into its place well enough to work as a pivotal tool that states could avail to improve their human rights situation or to fulfill their international human rights obligations, commitments, and pledges. This view was also shared by some countries then. For this reason, at the 18th session in 2011, Thailand, together with cross-regional core group members comprising Brazil, Honduras, Indonesia, Morocco, Norway, Qatar, Singapore, and Turkey, decided to table a resolution on enhancement of technical cooperation and capacity building in the fields of human rights, which was adopted by the Council. Traditionally, this resolution, with Thailand as the pen holder, has been adopted by consensus at every September session. The resolution has the mandate on us for 2 deliverables. 1, a panel discussion on specific topic to be held during Council June session, and 2, an OHCHR's report to serve as a basis for the panel discussion. It would be quite interesting to walk you quickly through our past series of panel discussions to learn how our deliverables have been crafted to address human rights and related issues along the history of the Council. Topic of each panel discussion and the OHCHR's report has touched upon both macro and micro issues of importance to us all by highlighting human rights dimensions, in particular those of specific and vulnerable groups. 2011, the panel focused on Universal Periodic Review, UPR, on the eve of its second cycle before it was about to kickstart in the following years. 2012, the theme was chosen for strengthening of the judiciary system and administration of justice. Then the discussion on the rights of persons with disabilities, migrants, older persons, prisoners, especially women prisoners, and the right to education were very timely for 2013, 2015, 2018, 2019, and 2020, respectively. In the year of 2014, before the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in the following year, the Council decided to highlight the theme on inclusive and participatory development and poverty eradication, the first goal of the SDGs that clearly involves the protection of basic human rights. 2017, the panel was dedicated to the overarching theme on human rights and the 2030 Agenda. 2016, the theme on a decade of technical cooperation and capacity building in the Council, challenges and the way forward, was coincide with the 10th anniversary of the Council. And this year, 2022, the resolution adopted last year indicated that the theme on gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls, contributing to the momentum of the UN Agenda on inclusive development and the Agenda on women's and child rights within the Council. The panel discussion on the topic will be held on the 4th of July during this session. General debate and thematic panel discussions under Agenda Item 10 have provided a platform of dialogue and cooperation where states and all other stakeholders can discuss and exchange experiences, best practices, successes, and challenges in the field of human rights. It is well noted that such debates and exchanges have contributed to some tangible results. This platform has led some countries to develop technical cooperation programs with multiple stakeholders to improve their human rights situation on specific issues. It has also raised some awareness and impetus for states to request technical assistance from OHCHR. Let me now move on to certain points that would help us to see how we could use technical cooperation to the fullest extent possible. First, human rights approach should be integrated in countries' national strategies, policies, and work plans. Technical cooperation can play a role here. Through programs and projects, countries would be able to enhance capacity of relevant authorities to better adjust their practices in order to improve the work of human rights protection and promotion, which would be in coherence with international human rights commissions and other in parallel. These practices will also facilitate countries to better assess a need for institutional or structural transformation in human rights apparatus at national level. Moreover, countries would be in better position to consult and to give consent to technical cooperation work by the OHCHR if so needed. Second, technical cooperation and technical assistance are not the same. Technical assistance is merely part of technical cooperation. So cooperation carries the meaning that all countries, big or small, rich or poor, developed or underdeveloped, could take part in technical cooperation collectively and constructively. I am of the view that expansion of technical cooperation through collaboration and partnership will help alleviate the workload of the Council in the longer run by reducing the number of country-specific resolutions and the use of special procedures. Third, as indicated in the Op. 3 of the UN 60/251, The effective coordination and the mainstreaming of human rights within the UN system should be promoted. Therefore, technical cooperation function in the field of human rights should be incorporated in the works and programs of all human rights mechanisms, including OHCHR, HRC, special procedures, and especially UN country team. Each agency should complement one another in consultation with states to create a higher degree of complementarity with the efforts at national, regional, and inter-regional levels. Fourth, when technical cooperation and capacity building takes into account the needs and priority of country concerned, it would certainly enhance national ownership and effort towards implementation in a sustainable manner. Fifth, trend in presenting politicized resolutions under item 10 should be avoided. Instead, constructive cooperation based on consultation with and with the consent of the state concerned should be promoted. By doing so, technical cooperation can be more effective and yields tangible results on the ground. Last but not least, OHCHR's technical cooperation program must address human rights challenges posed by emergency situations, including conflicts and health emergencies. Building resilience and preparedness deemed necessary for the future, since we all would travel down the road that would never be the same road again. So I thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this very comprehensive and very important highlight of the work of technical cooperation and the way forward. Thank you. C'est maintenant mon grand plaisir de présenter Madame Yvette Stevens, qui est présidente, qui a été présidente des séminaires intersessionnels sur la contribution du Conseil des droits de l'homme à la prévention des violations des droits de l'homme. Je voudrais dire que Mme Stevens est bien au-delà de cela. Elle a été la pierre angulaire de tellement de négociations que je crois qu'il serait difficile de les lister sur un morceau de papier. Et sa sagesse et sa vision du Conseil ont été saluées à de très multiples reprises. Donc c'est un grand honneur de l'avoir à côté de nous aujourd'hui au podium. Mrs. Stevens, the Council has certainly broadened the scope of its activities, as was mentioned by all previous speakers. If I were authorized to use a non-legal terms, and some of you know I love astronomy, I would certainly say that the Council resembles a galaxy with a core, the Council itself, and a myriad of objects gravitating around it, from special rapporteurs to investigating bodies, intergovernmental experts or working groups, panels, seminars, working groups, and of course the UPR. Mrs. Stevens, your experience of the Council has been impressive, and we would appreciate seeing you shedding lights on cases where you believe the work of the Council in the broader sense of the term has enabled particular human rights situations to evolve favorably and human rights crises to be averted. And in particular, would you mind developing further on what underlying conditions made this experience positive ones? You have the floor.
Thank you for that introduction, and let me also thank the President for inviting me to participate in this panel today. I would like to start with a quotation which was made by Ban Ki-moon in 2007. He said, all victims of human rights abuses should be able to look to the Human Rights Council as a forum and springboard for action. Simply put, Human Rights Council should be the voice of the voiceless. What has the Council done to enable human rights situations to evolve favorably? I will first look at the thematic area of work, because mainly we tend to look at the country situations. But let's look at the thematic areas of work of the Council. And the Council has done work on many thematic areas. If I am to name a few in which I was personally involved, for instance, the whole question of child early and forced marriages, also looking at persons living with albinism, female genital mutilation, business and human rights, and the list is exhaustive. But what haven't looked back is how has that affected the rights of people who were supposed to be looking after and considering. I would give one example, merely because I was involved from the very start. It's true that what you said, again, Eric, is that the Council is there and we have all these mechanisms sort of rotating around the Council itself. And what happens is that the Council passes a resolution and then the mechanisms come into play. We have the special rapporteur on the independent expert. We have the UPR, all act in terms of monitoring the implementation and also in following up on those resolutions. In a specific example which I want to give on persons living with albinism, I remember when we tried to bring this up to the Human Rights Council, it was not easy because some thought that there are too many independent experts already. Why don't we put this mandate under the special rapporteur for disabilities? And we were saying, no, but this is a bit different because people living with albinism were being not only discriminated against, but risk their lives in some countries where there is traditional belief that they have supernatural powers, and therefore parts of their body parts or themselves were being targeted for ritual killing. And this, I thought, was enough. This was enough to draw the attention of the Human Rights Council. This was going on. I mean, it was in the media, some press review, but the Council had to take it up in order to be able to move on protecting the rights of people living with albinism. And this was exactly what happened. After 3 resolutions, and by the way, yesterday was the International Day of People Living with Albinism, this all came from this council. But more importantly, that setting up the independent expert on albinism has led to a lot of action being taken. For instance, specific measures have been taken at the field level, and a plan of action to end attacks on persons living with albinism has actually been taken up by the African Union. There are hundreds of mass awareness campaigns and events and activities. There has been research and data on the situation of persons living with albinism. Their health needs have been taken into account, and also the training of persons with albinism through multilateral engagement. And then there's been extensive pioneering work to tackle harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks as a root cause of attacks on people living with albinism. This is work in progress and it continues, but it's thanks to the work of this council that this voice is being given to the voiceless in this regard. We could quote examples from a lot of these thematic themes that have emerged from this council. But I just gave that as an example, and it's one which I know very well. I will now turn to country situations, and this, I think many people have mentioned it. The UPR is playing a great role, maybe even greater than it's been given credit for. Of the 87,278 recommendations, 73% were supported. Implementation of these would most certainly enable particular human rights situations to evolve favorably. When we look at some of the progress, and I'm sure, Mike, that the will be touching on this a lot. When we look at some of the what have emerged from this council, is that sometimes we play down. We say, okay, yes, there are all these. Let's look at one area, for instance, the area of ratification of human rights treaties. We might say, yeah, this country would have done it anyway. But I must say that the pressure that comes through the recommendations from the Universal Periodic Reviews have played a big role in getting countries to accede to some of these treaties. I looked, for example, at the Convention Against Torture, which came into force since 1987. Of the 173 states that have ratified the treaty by 2001, 28 did so since 2006, partly due to the pressure of UPR recommendations, which means that 16% of the ratifications of the CAT happened after the Universal Periodic Review came into force. I personally participated in the UPR reviews of over 90 countries facing the second and third rounds of the UPR. The background reports show that recommendations are being implemented even if it is not at the desired level. This must surely have impact in the various countries. For my country, Sierra Leone, I know that following a brutal civil war and the focus on human rights and the building of human rights capacities have had a positive effect as a deterrent for a resumption of hostilities and conflicts. And the UPR recommendations are seen in this slide. Just as a bit of an anecdote, when I was home, I went to the market. So the market women, and there was somebody who came out and tried to educate me. Do you know about human rights? She was asking me. I was most amused because he said, I know my rights. And this is really remarkable. Everybody in my country know about human rights and their human rights. And this is thanks to the efforts partly through this Human Rights Council. There are various recently, my country abolished the death penalty. Now, that might seem, yes, another country. For my country, it has added significance in that in the past, so many people have been executed, sometimes even summarily, because of their involvement or suspected involvement in coup d'etats. So for us, this whole question of abolishing the death penalty assumes a significance which is just greater than, yes, okay, we stop it. For me, personally, I thought this was a great achievement. And it's thanks to, whilst I was still ambassador, we were still working towards it, thanks to a lot of pressure which was placed by this council on that. When it comes to there are various initiatives to follow up on reporting of the implementation of recommendations of the UPR, but it would be important to go beyond statistics to find out the impact that this is having on rights holders. I was going to say, if this does not exist, there is a need for OHCHR or the advisory committee to do an evaluation of the accomplishments in countries thanks to UPR and other human rights recommendations. I learned that UPR Info has been doing some work in this direction, and I hope that Ms. Mona, Executive Director, would throw some light on this. The attempt made by Norway and Singapore, for instance, to allow for positive experiences to be shared under Agenda Item 10 should be supported and applauded. What was considered as success stories in some countries, when I look at individual country situations, what was considered as success stories in some countries through actions of this council, the situation have unfortunately deteriorated. Never, even if it is believed that the attention of the council led to improvements in human rights in the respective countries. This brings me to the point to my last point, which I will bring out, that the council needs to pay greater attention on prevention. And prevention, by prevention, I mean preventing human rights violations in the first place and not preventing situations deteriorating, but actually preventing that these situations do not deteriorate to a conflict or to a point where we would have to step in with special measures, etc. And this is what the council was itself aware that it needed to do more on prevention. And this was in this capacity that I was requested to be chair rapporteur of a group of 3 that were doing widespread consultations to look at how the country itself can enhance its role in prevention and its mechanisms. Now, we this is all in line with paragraph 5F of Resolution 60/251. We did widespread consultations, were very, very widespread, and we came out with recommendations. The recommendations mainly relate to improving the rate of implementation of human rights recommendations, including the UPRs, and the setting up of a mechanism for early action. Resolution 4531 of this Council has incorporated these recommendations, but action has not yet been taken on them. It is extremely important that the Council does more in terms of making sure that the recommendations are implemented and that they are having an impact, and also that the Council itself can intervene with early action before situations deteriorate. There are recommendations to that effect, and my hope is that these will be looked at carefully, and these actions need to be taken in terms of the good offices that the Council could assume in certain situations before the persistent, consistent human rights violations lead to a situation of conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yvette, and thank you for the examples you provided, and also the link which you have made immediately with our two next speakers who are representing two mechanisms of the Council. First of all, let me welcome Mr. Victor Madrigal-Borlos, who is independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity and chair of, or former chair of the Special Procedure Coordination Committee. Until very recently, you were chair of this body, and you have had a tremendous impact on the work of this committee. Mr. Madrigal-Borlos, it's very often stated in this very room that the special procedure represents the jewel on the crown of the Council. This usually may or may not be accompanied by criticism of the validity of which I do not want to discuss in the context of the discussion, but the agreement seems to be very obvious. The work of special procedures mandate holders is simply irreplaceable. Mr. Madrigal-Borlos, as independent expert and as former chair of this coordinating committee, it would be very much appreciated if you could share with this room example of the activities of special rapporteur, of special mechanism, whatever they were, and to provide us with examples of positive changes that occurs as a result of their action.
Muchísimas gracias, señor Tistouné, y por supuesto mi agradecimiento a la presidencia del Consejo por este panel rico, extraordinario en este momento de nuestra historia. Y por supuesto yo querría estar seguro de que voy a poder compartir de una manera justa y apropiada el sentimiento de servicio, de humildad, de verdadero sentido de privilegio que compartimos las 79 personas que somos detentadoras de mandatos creados por el Consejo de Derechos Humanos. Y en este sentido, señor Tistouné, me voy a permitir referirme a la analogía que usted acaba de mencionar. Es frecuente que uno de los muchos apelativos con que se nos conoce es la joya de la corona. Comprendo muy bien la intencionalidad de esa metáfora y la aprecio, pero le confieso que siempre he tenido alguna dificultad con ella, porque las esmeraldas, los rubíes y los diamantes de la corona están usualmente resguardadas en torres inaccesibles, custodiadas por guardas de seguridad, y son extraídas únicamente en eventos de pompa y circunstancia. Mis colegas y yo hemos fijado la accesibilidad, la proximidad a las personas a las cuales servimos, a los estados a los cuales servimos, a las organizaciones de la sociedad a las cuales servimos, como uno de los valores que queremos servir, y por lo tanto yo soy muy parcial a la analogía del hecho de que el Consejo de Derechos Humanos nos confía ser sus ojos y sus oídos, como reporteros que somos de las situaciones concernientes a los derechos humanos. Y efectivamente, creo que la palabra relator, la palabra experto, la palabra grupo nos evoca la idea de que nosotros recabamos evidencia de la manera en que la violencia, la discriminación, las mecánicas de exclusión y desempoderamiento ocurren en la vida diaria de personas alrededor del planeta. Hablamos, por supuesto, de discriminación histórica a la que han sido sometidas personas, pueblos y comunidades. Hablamos de problemas y problemáticas globales como la tortura o la desaparición forzada, en la cual es parte de la agenda planetaria asegurar erradicación, y hablamos de significativas áreas de preocupación como el cambio climático y de oportunidad como el mundo de las empresas y los derechos humanos. En esta labor y en nuestra implementación de enfoques basados en la evidencia, nosotros tenemos el privilegio de recabar historias personales que las víctimas de violaciones de derechos humanos nos hacen el honor de compartir con nosotros, frecuentemente en el contexto de gran sufrimiento que han tenido la experiencia personal de pasar. Recogemos también evidencia por parte del activismo y las narrativas de cuestionamiento de sistemas existentes y, por supuesto, recabamos también las narrativas institucionales y políticas. Y esa evidencia, ese conocimiento técnico, ese conocimiento de buenas y mejores prácticas fluyen a través de nuestro trabajo, a través del trabajo que realizamos en investigaciones temáticas, en las cuales identificamos temas que constituyen verdaderos bloques de construcción para las narrativas de derechos humanos, fluyen en las comunicaciones individuales en las que procuramos alertar a los estados sobre situaciones que pueden constituir posibles o actuales violaciones de derechos humanos y fluyen, por supuesto, en nuestro trabajo de visitas a los países. Ustedes sabrán que en este momento hay 128 invitaciones genéricas realizadas, 171 estados de las Naciones Unidas han sido visitadas y únicamente 22 estados nunca han recibido una visita de los procedimientos especiales. Estas narrativas, estas historias, esta evidencia también fluye a través del diálogo. El diálogo que se nos manda a realizar con el propósito de transmitir de una manera respetuosa, rica, con base en la evidencia, con contenido, las situaciones y las preocupaciones que hemos constatado en el contexto de nuestro trabajo. En este contexto, señor Tistouné, existen muchísimas historias positivas. Tenemos historias de legislación discriminatoria en su naturaleza que ha sido desmantelada. Tenemos historia de adopción de mecanismos legislativos antidiscriminatorios o conducentes a las temáticas de derechos humanos que han gozado procesos todos de la asesoría de relatoras especiales, de expertas independientes y de miembros de grupos de trabajo. Tenemos también la adopción de políticas públicas inclusivas, protocolos en materia de constatación forense de violaciones de derechos humanos, de desaparición forzada, de ejecución extrajudicial, que han contado con el apoyo de los respectivos relatores especiales, y planes nacionales de acción, en los cuales, si tenemos la oportunidad, siempre vamos a ofrecer la asistencia técnica para asegurar que temáticas y preocupaciones sean consideradas de una manera comprensiva. Y por supuesto, iniciativas de apoyo y acceso a la justicia, en las cuales, de manera independiente, los órganos de justicia nacional, regional y global emiten decisiones fundamentales con relación a la temática de derechos humanos. Descubrimos en este trabajo de cuestionamiento y encuesta temática, descubrimos otras vetas. Hemos descubierto la importancia de los enfoques interseccionales en nuestro trabajo, pues no existe ninguna persona con experiencias únicas de violencia y de discriminación que no vea que esas experiencias se generan de una multiplicidad de identidades a las cuales, bajo las cuales se identifican las personas, y descubrimos vetas comunes, por ejemplo, con grandes preocupaciones planetarias como es el cambio climático. Y tengo el placer de reportarle, señor presidente, que la semana pasada en la reunión de detentadores de mandatos, la reunión anual, nuestro colega Ian Fry, el nuevo relator de cambio climático, fue uno de los más populares integrantes de la reunión, pues muchos de nosotros estábamos interesados en descubrir los puntos de intersección. Y por supuesto, recalco que las entidades receptoras de nuestro trabajo son, por supuesto, el Consejo de Derechos Humanos, la Asamblea General, pero también ampliamente concebida toda la familia de las Naciones Unidas y, por supuesto, en la manifestación de sus tres pilares, igualmente fundamentales, igualmente sustentadores todos del equilibrio planetario y de la agenda global, el pilar de derechos humanos, el pilar de paz y seguridad y el pilar de desarrollo sustentable. Y llevando estas expresiones políticas a lo concreto, por supuesto a través del nuevo sistema de coordinadores nacionales y residentes y los equipos de país de las Naciones Unidas. En este sentido, por supuesto, reconozco las diferentes vetas del trabajo de nuestros procedimientos especiales y reitero la importancia de que quienes tengan interés de comprender de una manera un poco más amplia la manera en que funcionan nuestros métodos de trabajo tienen muchas herramientas a su disposición, incluyendo un video que muy recientemente se ha develado, producido con el apoyo, por supuesto, siempre no solo de la oficina de la alta comisionada misma, a la cual rindo homenaje, sino también los colegas de la oficina de la alta comisionada y quienes brindan el apoyo brillante de Secretaría del Comité de Coordinación de los Procedimientos Especiales, así como los muchos